Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is all about the basic camera settings that you need to know for the landscape photography. So let's get started. It's a very crucial step to set your camera settings correctly before you take any photograph to get the best images. Suppose you are in a field with the camera and your composition ready. Now, before pressing the shutter button of your camera, ask yourself a few questions. Number one, do you need the image to be focused from front to back, everything in focus? Or do you need the image where only few areas or the certain area of your image to be in focus? Then the second question, do you need your subject to be freezed or do you need your subject to be in motion? That is, you want to show the motion blur. Third, whether the lighting condition is enough or the lighting is low or is it overexposing your image. So depending on this, you need to set your camera settings. Now you are in a camera setting menu. There are three important elements in the camera setting menu. Those are ISO, shutter speed and the aperture. Now these three elements form the basic exposure triangle. Every time you take the photograph, you need to manipulate those three elements to get the correct exposure of your image. So you need to be expert on manipulating these three elements to get your best exposure of your image. So let's understand this basic exposure triangle first. Here we can see the diagrammatic representation of the exposure triangle formed by the aperture, shutter speed and the ISO. Now let's start to understand the aperture first. The aperture meaning the opening in the lens. That is, you can see the opening of the lens right from here. The widest opening of the lens is here in f1 by 1.4, where you get the shallow depth of field, meaning the only certain area of your image will be in focus, the other areas will be the out of focus. Now when you start decreasing your aperture of the lens, you start to get the deeper depth of field. That is, in your image everything will be in focus from front to back. Now coming to the shutter speed, here you can see different images, the running of a man in different images in different shutter speed. Now in this image you can see because of the slow shutter speed, the moving subject is in blur. Now when you shoot at the faster shutter speed, you are freezing the motion of the subject. There is another element called ISO. You can see the range of ISO from 100 to 12,800 range, and it may differ to various cameras. Now when you shoot the image at the base ISO, that is 100, you are introducing less noise to the image and your image will look more cleaner. Then when you bump up your ISO, you are introducing more noise to the image and your image will look more grainy. Now there is a scenario where you want to shoot a landscape photos, so you want to have the image where you have everything in focus from front to back. So you need to choose the small aperture value. Here if you choose the f1 by 16, then there is a subject that is moving, maybe some because of wind blowing, there is some leaves of a tree moving, so you want to freeze that motion of that subject, so you need to select the first shutter speed. Now in that scenario, one problem is when you're selecting the small aperture, you are allowing less light to enter your camera. Again you are selecting the first shutter speed, so you are again allowing the small amount of time or small fraction of time for the light to enter your camera. So in that situation your image will look darker. In order to brighten your image, you need to increase the ISO. So when you increase the ISO, you don't actually allow the light to come in your camera, but you increase the sensitivity of the sensor of your camera. Always try to manipulate your aperture or the shutter speed first before you're bumping the ISO to brighten up your image. If you want to brighten up your image without increasing the ISO, what you can do is you can select some aperture that is more wider, maybe f1/11, and you have to select the shutter speed that is more slower than the 1/1000. Maybe you can select 1/250. In this situation, you are allowing more light to come than the previous aperture of the lens, and if you are selecting the slower shutter speed, you are allowing more light to come in your camera. So in this situation, your image will look little brighter than before, and you don't need to bump up your ISO to that extent where you have increased your ISO in the previous scenario. So that is how this aperture, shutter speed and ISO are interrelated to each other to get the correct exposure of your image. Now, after understanding these three basic elements of the exposure triangle, I will suggest you to shoot always in manual mode. Sometimes you can go ahead with the aperture priority mode, but you don't have the control over the shutter speed. Now, when you choose the aperture priority, always choose the small aperture, maybe from f11 to f16. That will give the images focus from front to back. Now, if you have to choose some little wider aperture, maybe f6 to f8, you need to focus tag your image. Now, the second setting is metering. The metering is how your camera determines what correct the shutter speed or the aperture should be depending on the amount of light entering in your camera and hitting the sensor. Now, there are different modes of metering. There are evaluative or the matrix metering, partial metering, spot metering, center weighted average metering. Now, the most important metering in the landscape photography is the evaluative or the matrix metering. So what does it do? It evaluates the level of light in the entire frame of your image and tries to come out with the best exposure value of the result that balances the darker and the brighter area of your image. It also tries to give more importance in the area where your camera is focusing. Here we can see the different mode of metering. This is the evaluative or the matrix metering. This is partial metering. This is the spot metering, and this is partial weighted average metering. So here you can see in this image how different metering works differently. Here in this image, the evaluative or the matrix metering is adjusting the level of light in the entire image, whereas in center weighted metering, only it is evaluating the level of light in the center of the image, and in the spot metering, only the small area of the central part of the image is getting evaluated and getting the proper exposure of the image. Now, if you see this image is taken from the same place with the different settings of the metering. In this image, this is taken with the matrix metering, where you're getting the proper exposure of the whole image, whereas in center weighted average metering, you get the exposure correctly in the center of the image. In the spot metering, you get a small area of this image where it is properly exposed. So the best exposure of your image you can achieve with the matrix or the evaluative metering, provided all the three elements of the basic exposure triangle are correctly set. Now, the third setting is the white balance. The white balance is the balancing the color temperature of your image. That is how warm or cool the overall color of your image looks. So why do you need to adjust this white balance? In order to bring the color of your image as close to the color that looks in the real life. So here we have the menu of the white balance settings with different mode of white balance here. Here is auto, incandescent, fluorescent, daylight, flash, cloudy, shade with different range of color temperature, which is measured in Kelvin. Now, this is the image of a sunset. You can see different white balance settings are applied to this image, and you are getting different color temperature. So in this image, this color temperature is looking good from 5200 Kelvin to 8000 Kelvin. So you need to adjust the white balance according to the situation, so that the color of your image should look almost close to the color that looks in real life. if you are shooting the raw image, you don't need to worry about the white balance, because you can always change the white balance during the post-processing. Now if you're shooting the JPEG image, you need to set this white balance every time you shoot the image according to the scene. If you're shooting in the midday, you can adjust with the daylight white balance, and if you're shooting the sunset or the sunrise, you can adjust with the cloudy or the shade white balance. Now if you're shooting the image of the night sky, you have to change the white balance from 3500 Kelvin to 4500 Kelvin. That will give the best result. So my suggestion will be, if you're shooting raw image, you always keep your white balance in auto white balance mode, because you can always change this white balance to different white balance in the post-processing. So here is the image I have opened in the Lightroom. This image was taken with the auto white balance settings. Now you can see in the right hand side there is an option for the white balance. So if you click in the white balance, there is the options available. So you can change to different white balance settings. As for example, if you click on the daylight, you can see how it changes its color. Then if you click on the shade, then you can see how it warms up the colors of the image. Now if you click on the fluorescent, you can see how it changes to bluish color. Now finally you can change the white balance according to the color you want. So if I want to change the color of the image, I can warm it up a little bit. So when you shoot a raw image, you can easily change to different white balance you want. You don't need to change in camera every time you take images. Now the fourth setting is the picture style setting. Now you can see this setting here. If you see, there is different settings of the picture style, that is the landscape, standard, portrait, fine details, neutral, or auto mode. So these settings are absolutely zero effect when you shoot a raw image, but when you shoot the JPEG image, you need to change this picture style to different categories. Now the last and the final setting is the image quality setting, that is in which settings you are going to shoot your image, that is the raw image or the JPEG image. Now I was telling in this video from the beginning, always shoot raw, and raw. The reason being, the raw image has the highest quality information, and the post-processing gives you the most information retained in it. When you shoot JPEG image, the JPEG image is small. It contains much less information than the raw image, and it gives the low quality image. So guys, I hope this video is informative for you. If you like this video, please like, subscribe my channel, and share this video. And till then, bye for now.